precious commodity. So I'm going to ask you not to applaud during the program, but we will do so now. And this round of applause is to thank the audience for being here, or the candidates for being here, the library staff, the staff of Pilsen Alliance, and everyone else making tonight possible. So let's clap, and while we do so, the sign language interpreter will come over here. Thank you. Active Transportation Alliance is a not-profit organization. We're working in metropolitan Chicago to promote better walking, biking, and transit. As a 501c4 organization, our mission is to educate voters and candidates about transportation issues. However, tonight we're focusing on bus transportation in Chicago. We're here tonight to discuss why Chicago's bus ridership is declining and what we can do to fix it. Tonight's program is a series of short one-on-one conversations with each mayoral candidate and our moderator. The questions we have are gleaned from the audience, and people have sent us emails as suggested questions. Our moderator tonight is Chicago Tribune transportation reporter Mary Wisniewski. During the forum, each candidate will have 3 minutes to make remarks and 5 minutes for some Q&A. I will next introduce Jose Ricana, I think I pronounced that right, and he will next introduce Mary Wisniewski. Jose is with the Pilsen Alliance.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Jose Ricana. I'm an organizer with the Pilsen Alliance. We're a 20-year-old social justice advocacy organization here in the neighborhood of Pilsen. Very happy to be co-hosting this with Active Trans and the amazing work they do. The report cards are outside that you guys should definitely check out. We're here today to talk about transportation, and especially for us, we do view it, all transportation issues, kind of as a social justice issue, especially public transportation. It's about access to the city, it's about access to opportunity, and if you're talking about public, something the government controls like public transportation, it's about how they value giving the public that access. Another quick thing to say is that 7% of the 2016 Chicago operating budget, which comes out to $264 million, was funded by fines, primarily in communities of color, tickets, boots, which will drive people to use public transportation. So it's also a question about how we fund this and not having a regressive funding source for giving more people opportunity. So thank you so much for being here today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mary. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jose. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll go ahead and get started. Businessman Willie Wilson was first here, and so we're going to let him come and be the first speaker. So please come up, Mr. Wilson. Okay, we're going to have to pass the mic back and forth, but you get to have your 3 minutes first.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name is Dr. Willie Wilson. I live here in Chicago. I got arrived in Chicago in 1965. 11 brothers and sisters from a little place called Gilbert, Louisiana. We sharecroppers. We pick cotton and we chop cotton. And we ran away from home at age 13. We made 20 cents per hour, and we didn't get any more schooling than that, but we got to Florida and we made $1.10 per hour. Then we left from there, got to Chicago. After we got to Chicago, it was pretty tough up here at first. Left, went to New York City, pretty tough there also. We ended up working at McDonald's, mopping floors and, flipping hamburgers. And after we did that for a while, we said, well, we worked 5 years at McDonald's without a day off. 5 years without a day off. And then we got to the next 5 years, Then we was able to walk up to the founder of McDonald's and ask for an opportunity. He gave us the opportunity. After that, we kind of like wanted to do something different. So we did something different. We went in a business called Hallmark Medical Supplies. So today we came from 20 cents per hour. Today we have a international company. Does about $60 million a year in business, and with that free. I believe in equal opportunity for all citizens, and equality in jobs and contract for all of Chicago's 7 to 7 community. We believe in fairness. We believe that violence and things of that nature come from a fact that we do not put the resources within certain community. We do not believe in adding more and more police officers. We tried that, it goes up, up, up. So why don't we try putting jobs and contracts in those 8 communities that cause those problems? I believe in fairness. I'm one also, as the only candidate that I know of, have put in his own money. I put in the last 4 or 5 months over millions of dollars of my own money. I've done that for a reason, because I don't want to be bought by nobody. You know, if I'm running for the citizen. I'm not running for the money. I'm not running for a career. June 16th, I made 70 years old, and I don't need a job at 70 years old. All right? So, I'm appreciative for being here. If a question that I don't know, I just say I don't know. And then I ask for the people who's here on another day or something, you can help me. My website, WillieWilsonPremier.com. WillieWilsonPremier.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson, I should say. I wanted to start off by asking, do you ever ride the CTA?
Well, I take the CTA and the train about 3 times a year with my wife. As a business person now, I drive in, or my driver drives me, one of the two. We have to move fast, and we have to get to places. Down south, we didn't have CTA. We had to walk, right? So what we do ride the CTA 3 times a year, approximate, just to get the feel for the community. Because my life, I'm always busy, working, international, doing a lot of things. But I do take out at least 3 times a year and ride the CTA, just to get to know the people. If you ask me today how much does it cost to get on the CTA bus, I probably wouldn't know it, because rate been going up so high. And we think that personally, that the reason why I think the ridership is going down, because the rate is too high. You know, people can't afford to pay these high prices. You know, I believe that you gotta lower those prices in order to get more ridership. You know, I don't think you should put the burden on people who are trying to make a living. They have to pay such high costs. Our senior citizens who cannot afford to even get on a bus because of the cost. You know, so but in answer to your question, 3 times a year approximately.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about your proposal to let seniors ride free. This has been tried before, and it was a big cost burden on the transit agencies. And I wondered if you would have a means test for seniors to make sure that only low-income seniors ride, and also how would you pay for this?
Well, you have to lower the bus fare in order to create more riders. You know, it's kind of like most people that I know are, when they buy gas, they go over to Indiana because the price is much more lower that way. You would increase ridership if you lower the price. It's the same way as you go and shop at Walmart or Jewel. You got a sale, everybody rush there and buy a product. You know, so you higher your price, you run people out of town. That's one of the things I've been talking about, the people, the citizens in Chicago, and letting them know that the politicians in Chicago have raised taxes 8 times, have ran business in Indiana and Texas and Arkansas, who are more tax friendly, but yet they fill their pocket with money. That's why you hear me always say, those politicians need to resign. They need to be investigated, and they need to be arrested for the wrongdoing they have done, for putting a burden on a citizen of Chicago while they have a conflict of interest.
I wanted to ask also about capital infrastructure for the CTA, especially for bus service. One of the things that the CTA complains about is not having enough money to improve its buses, to improve bus routes, to make things. They want more money to make the buses faster, to improve being able to get through traffic lights a little bit quicker. I wondered where would you get the money from to make the improvements for the CTA if you would lower fares?
Well, one of the things where you get money is that, look, I'm a business person. We had to struggle and make our business big. And I have a lot of experience in terms of business. 1 year we lost, woke up overnight, we lost like $72 million. Just woke up. Climate market change. Less than 3 years we came out of this $72 million worth debt. Well, you have to lower those prices. You have to have equality in terms of contract, job within the CTA. I met with some of the ladies and gentlemen that work for CTA a couple weeks ago. Well, when I speak of equality, it must include white, African American, Latino American, Asian American, and others. It must include that. When I was telling the gentleman the other night, I said, well, you all drive the buses, but who takes then fill up the gas? You take the buses, but where you buy the buses from? Why don't we put a grant together?
Where's the money going to come from for these?
Well, lowering your prices. Lowering your prices, where money gonna come from? If you do a sale today, and I'll just use this as a fact, a figure, from one of my business experience. If you lower the prices.
Oh, go ahead. We just need to finish. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have to finish where I
Yeah.
know how. Okay, I'll try to be shorter though. If you lower the prices on a Big Mac, people come in and buy plenty of Big Mac. Okay, all I'm saying is this: you got to lower prices. If you jack up the prices, people stop riding. Then you'll see things fall in place as a business person.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Wilson, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, next we're going to bring up Cook County Circuit Court Clerk Dorothy Brown. Would you like to give us your presentation? Thank you.
Good evening. You know, John F. Kennedy said that a rising tide lifts all boats. But that's not happening in Chicago, where economic development, schools, and even criminal justice reform is concerned. And then Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I say enough is enough. And it's time to make sure that everyone in Chicago has hope, that it is fair and it's equitable. I have the perfect background, experience, and the heart to be the mayor of the city of Chicago. I have the background because a lot of people do not realize that I'm an attorney. And I can handle the legal lawmaking body of the city council. And they also do not realize that I'm a certified public accountant. I'm probably one of the few people that have passed the bar exam and the CPA exam in this country. And I hold a master's degree in business administration and finance, so I can handle the $8 billion budget of the city of Chicago. I've already been handling a $100 million budget for the last 18 years. And I also actually worked for the CTA for 9 years, and I actually had to make sure that the revenue, the billions of dollars in revenue and the billions of dollars in assets were properly controlled as the general auditor for the Chicago Transit Authority. And I helped the African American gentleman start an accounting firm, and as such, I was one of 2 people that were selected to head the audit of the entire city of Chicago. So I understand the city of Chicago's budget as well. But I say that I have the heart because I came from very humble beginnings. A set of poor and uneducated parents. My mother was a cook and a domestic worker. My father was a mining worker and a farmer. And as a matter of fact, he took me and my 7 siblings to those cotton fields. And so I understand and respect the least to the greatest. I worked in a factory right out here in Niles, Illinois, putting out parts on a paint line. And when I graduated from college, I graduated in accounting, and my sister had already told me that I had to be the best because I was going into it with 2 strikes against me. I was black and I was a woman. And it was a white male-dominated profession. Well, I graduated number 1, but not one major accounting firm would give me a job offer. What happens when number 1 is not good enough? So I came to Chicago and became the first African American in the history of Cook County to be the clerk of the second largest court system in the world. And I want to bring that same fight to make sure that we have fairness and equity as it relates to our Chicago public schools, as it relates to economic development for the entire city of Chicago, and as it relates to criminal justice reform. I say criminal and social justice reform because there must be fairness in the way we mete out justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start off by asking you the same question. Do you ride the CTA?
So I most recently wrote the CTA while I was doing my petitions. I actually walked from the train. I was on the train, not the bus. Walking from train to train, as a matter of fact. I actually figured that out. So I wrote it several days. But prior to that, I probably rode the train, usually during my campaigning time. I would ride the train from stop to stop and shake people's hands and that sort of thing. Of course, when I was at the CTA, I rode the CTA every day, the buses and the trains for 9 years.
Okay, thanks very much. One of the reasons that bus ridership is down in the city of Chicago is because there's more congestion on the streets. And I wondered what you think is causing that congestion. Some people say rideshare, some people say construction, and what can we do to alleviate that problem?
Well, what's causing it, those two things, of course, the cars on the street, many things that we've been doing as it relates to trying to do designated bus lanes and that sort of thing really hasn't done what needs to be done to make CTA, the bus lanes, less congested. I would be actually interested in increasing the bus lanes. I was thinking that we could actually have a bus lane, a designated bus lane on North Lakeshore Drive and South Lakeshore Drive, and that I actually start that bus lane on the south side at Jeffrey, start at Hollywood on the north side, and actually have buses to drop people off there, and then that would be an express, and that would increase ridership and also reduce congestion because I believe many people would actually ride the buses if we do that. And of course the fares. We need to have discounted fares, maybe not free fares, but discounted fares for seniors, discounted fares for low-income individuals. I also am interested in having a discounted fare for State Street and Michigan Avenue to increase shopping on State Street and Michigan Avenue, especially during certain hours. During the lunch hour, we used to be able to ride from let's say, Lake to Roosevelt, and on Michigan Avenue, let's say from Wacker all the way up to the Magnificent Mile. And I think that would, and we also would have to have some things that we would be able to reduce traffic for downtown as well.
Thank you. One of the problems that the CTA is having right now is dealing with the reduced fares that it has now because it's not getting compensation from the state to pay for those reduced fares, and this is causing them budget problems. What would you do to pressure Springfield to put more resources into public transit?
Well, a lot of the people that are in Springfield are from Chicago and have relatives in Chicago. So my first call would be to the governor. The governor, on yesterday, I was at his inauguration. He has some great ideas in helping the poor, not balancing the budget on the poor. And so that's really something that can be done if he doesn't want to balance the budget on the poor, then put some money into transit. I would also be in touch with the Federal Transportation Administration in Washington, D.C. to have them put more money into the operating funds, of course, to help alleviate some of this congestion that we have and that sort of thing, so that we may be in a position to put more money over on the operating side. So we have to look at the operating dollars as well as the capital dollars for the Chicago Transit Authority. So those are the kind of things that I would do. And I would also actually designate a TIF fund, a transportation TIF fund, especially on the capital side, for helping with the Chicago Transit Authority.
We have a minute left. Would you support putting exclusive bus lanes on Ashland Avenue or on Western, or in both?
I actually would support putting bus lanes on both. I think they're both major corridors, and people really have a problem. There's not enough It's so far west. There's really a problem with transportation of individuals that live in those areas. Many are low income, especially the South Ashland and Southwestern. And so I would be actually interested in putting a designated bus lanes on both Western as well as Ashland.
Great. Okay. Well, Clerk Brown, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Gary McCarthy, our former police superintendent. Hi, Mr. McCarthy.
So I was confused, as usual. Do you want us to talk about buses and transit, or do you want us to talk about ourselves? The 3 minutes.
You can do whatever you want.
Well,
It's your 3 minutes.
It's my 3 minutes. Okay, we haven't started yet. So, my name is Gary McCarthy. I'm also running for mayor. Anybody else here running for mayor besides us up here? So I want to make it clear, the reason why I'm running for mayor, and then we can talk about transportation and some of the things that I think we have to recognize. I'm running for mayor because I can't stand by and watch what's happening in this city. Our elected officials have run this place into the ground between the crime, the taxes, the economy, and the education system. We're losing population. And because we're losing population, we're losing our tax base. Because we're losing our tax base, we're closing schools on the south and the west side, pulling mental health centers and services from those neighborhoods that need it the most, which is causing more gun violence, which is causing people to leave. So these issues cannot be separated, and it affects everything that we do, including transit. And one of the things that in the document that I got to spend a lot of time going over, because there was a heck of a lot of information in there, we didn't really talk about crime. According to what it says, is that since 2012, there's a 21% reduction in the number of people using public transportation. I think a lot of that has to do with crime. When I talk to people, they are petrified to ride on the buses and on the trains. And one of the reasons, believe it or not, is because we actually have very good cameras. And because we have very good cameras, we happen to catch a lot of this crime, and it goes right on TV, which makes the impression worse than the facts of crime on the transit system. Having said that, we have to correct that. There's no two ways about it. Crime in the city has skyrocketed. There are 658 more murders over the last 3 years since I was superintendent and was terminated than the previous 3 years. So crime affects everything. And what happens on the street affects what happens on the trains, which happens on the buses, all at the same time. Crime is the #1 issue in this city. Obviously, I have a leg up on that. I spent 35 years in policing, 7 years running New York's crime strategy, Newark, New Jersey for 5 years, and then 5 years here in Chicago. I'm a manager. I've been at the top of 3 major city governments in this country for 17 years, and I'm ready for this job. With that, I'm going to forego the rest of my time and take your questions, because I don't want to talk too much about me. Let's get into submissions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McCarthy. I wanted to continue on the crime issue. You had mentioned the amount of cameras on the system. There are more cameras than there used to be. There's cameras in bus shelters now. But crime is increasing. There's a greater number of pickpockets on the system, other kinds of crime. What do you think can be done on the CTA, especially in the bus system, to stop the crime?
So, cameras do not stop crime. All the studies show us that eventually people don't even see the blue lights flashing, and we have video of narcotics dealers standing right under the blue lights selling narcotics. So that's the first thing. It does help us solve crime, especially when you have high definition cameras that really get good pictures. We just saw this with the mob action that happened on the Red Line. 5 individuals have now been arrested. That is solely the result of good video, good pictures, publishing them, and people recognizing who they are. The most important thing that we could do on the transit system, on the trains, is, believe it or not, fare evasion. Because individuals who are going to commit crimes on the trains generally are not going to pay to get on the train. So if you stop them at the gates for fare evasion and they don't get on the system, you're preventing crime by making that happen. It has a lot to do with pattern identification. Where it happens on buses, you have to look at where the person got on and where the person got off, which is easy to do with the cameras at this point, and identifying a pattern. And by the way, we don't wait until we have 5, 10, or 15 robberies at a time. 2 crimes makes a pattern. You have to arrest somebody for the second one or the first one to prevent the third and the fourth from happening.
I'd also like to ask you about, besides reducing crime, what are some other things that can be done to increase ridership on the buses?
Well, 21% since 2012. I always look at cause and effect and analysis. And the thing that jumped out at me before I even read down the page was Uber, rideshare, and Lyft. They really came to Chicago in 2011 and 2012, which means that impact may have happened right there. That is impacting traffic. That is impacting ridership. I think we need to start by leveling the playing field for the transportation industry, including taxis and taxi cabs and some of the other limousines and things of that nature, where the rules have to be the same for everybody. And unfortunately, as we know in the city of Chicago, there's something called the quid pro quo. And I think everybody is aware of some of the individuals who are at the top of Uber, which has it that they don't have the same licensing requirements as taxi cabs, absolutely destroying that industry. There's an estimated 30,000 cars a day that come into the city to do those things, which is really blowing the place up, quite frankly.
And I wanted to ask you too, do you ride the CTA?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, the bus I would take frequently on Michigan Avenue going north and south, which is going from where my office used to be before I took this job, which, by the way, doesn't pay, in case anybody's interested. And the transit system I use all the time going to the airports, and particularly Wrigley Field, because it's very easy to get there with that.
What can be done to get the state of Illinois to start funding transit infrastructure? We haven't had a transit capital bill in 10 years.
Well, I think this is all about professional relationships, and I think where those relationships exist now, we have to be able to reach out on a personal level to Springfield. But, at the end of the day, as Dorothy said, most of the folks who work in Springfield, or many of them, are actually from Chicago. And we need to get those individuals to actually look out for the best interests of the people of Chicago, not themselves.
And I'd ask the same question about federal funding. Right now, we're not getting, we haven't had an infrastructure bill from the administration. And how can we convince the FTA to start funding transit more heavily?
Well, I think it starts by having a relationship with the federal government, right? And right now, Chicago doesn't have that. It seems like we're at war with this administration, and quite frankly, that polarization is hurting everybody. Look at what's happening right now with the government shutdown. So my thoughts are very simple. I say it frequently. We've got to stop focusing on what makes us different, whether it's Democrat, Republican, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, you name it. We've got to focus on what makes us the same, and that's our values.
Mr. McCarthy, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Next, we would like to bring up Paul Vallis, our former head of the schools.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I think we're going to improve ridership if we simply make it a priority. I remember Frank Savickas was in the state senate many, many, many years ago when I went to work for Don Clark Netsch. And I remember he had this plan where he actually wanted to make mass transit use CTA bus use free by imposing a tax to totally subsidize it, because he figured that the ridership would increase if the public transportation was free. Now, I'm certainly not recommending or proposing that, but if you set a goal to increase the use of mass transit, then you've got to focus on the reasons why the use of mass transit might not be increasing, it might be decreasing. I mean, the bus service used to be twice of what the train service is currently. So you've got to look at issues like public safety, reliability, You've got to look at issues like equity. You've got to look at issues of affordability, and you've got to really develop strategies to address all those issues. You know, so obviously I hope to take some questions, and I posted something today on my website laying out my long-term comprehensive plan of transportation. I hope you have a chance to take a look at that. You know, my entire career has been problem solving. In 1995, I took over the schools when they had a $1.4 billion structural deficit, and 6 years later, I left a school system not having closed a single school with 70,000 more children than they have today, and over $1 billion in cash balances. And then after challenging Rod Blagojevich and not getting any support from the establishment candidates, I went and revitalized the schools in Philadelphia and rebuilt the schools in New Orleans, rebuilt the schools in Bridgeport, Connecticut, did international work. I say this because my approach has always been problem solving. The issue of mass transit use is a problem. I hope that wasn't me. You know, the issue of mass transit use and underuse is an issue is a problem that needs solving, and it needs someone who not only understands budget and financing, but also somebody who understands that the purpose of the mass transit system is to support the entire community. When I built my 78 schools in Chicago, 90% of those schools were in the poor communities. When they did a magnet high school on the north side, I put a magnet high school on the south side. I put a magnet high school in every region. When I pulled all the school construction programs out of the Public Building Commission, 54% of all those contracts went to minority companies, and 58% of the workers hired were minority. I say that because that reflects a candidate who has always immersed himself or herself in the community and has always thought about the larger community when it comes to the allocation and dispensing of city resources. I think that's the type of leadership we need when it comes to mass transportation and public transportation, and that's the type of mayor I will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vallis. We're going to go right into what you said about not closing schools. One of the more controversial things that the CTA does is end bus routes because there aren't enough riders. And I wondered if you can speak to how do we have bus routes or for limited ridership and still be able to maintain the finances of the CTA? How can you make that balance?
Well, look, you know, the schools went into a financial crisis in part because the schools lost population. I mean, the reason I reached $1 billion in cash balances was in part because the population grew, because we put programs into schools to grow the schools. 70,000 more students today, or the only, in 40 years, only 6 years, there's been growth. The 6 years I was superintendent. The same approach needs to be taken with mass transportation. I mean, people shouldn't be driving their cars or using Uber or using Lyft. They should be taking mass transportation. So if transportation is reliable, if transportation is safe, if transportation is affordable, your ridership will go up. If your ridership goes up, if your ridership is constantly improving, then obviously you can maintain fares and lower fares, or provide the type of fares that will be lowered for those people who simply can't afford them. So I think it's that type of strategic approach that you have to take. We need to set a goal to significantly increase ridership, and in working with the community, we need to come up with the strategies needed. And you've articulated many of those strategies. You certainly have schooled me on this over the past week or so in talking about what the priorities would be to increase the ridership. I think we need to embrace many, if not all, of those ideas.
What sorts of things do you think we can do to increase bus speeds? Right now they're about 9 miles an hour, and this might be one reason why people don't want to take the bus.
Well, I think bus lanes. I think looking at where the bus pickup points are. I think those are things that can be a factor. I don't profess to be an expert when it comes to bus speeds or bus transportation, but you've laid out a list of things that you've articulated that you consider to be obstacles to speedy and reliable bus services. I think all those are worth considering. Now, let me point out that what's important is always the funding issue. We're looking at a city that's about to dedicate $1 billion in TIF revenues to a TIF on the north side that most of the community don't even want, or at least they don't want that type of expenditure or the type of overdevelopment that's going to change the very nature of that community. So it's simply a question of providing the resources needed to make the adjustments, whether it's where the pickup points. the bus reliability, the bus lanes. In other words, creating conditions that will allow bus traffic to move quickly and move more smoothly, move more reliably.
What do you think of innovations like a traffic signal priority, where you have where the light can go green for the buses, or adding an extra lane at the intersection to let the bus go through first?
Well, I think all those are good ideas, and again, I don't profess to be an expert on this. The question that I always have, that one always has to consider, is what the impact it's going to have on the community at large. I think one needs to build a community, one needs to get a handle on the community's perspective on things. But if your goal is to increase ridership, and if part of that increase means accelerating the speed, speeding up, having more reliability, having quicker transportation, because as you all know, I've been riding the buses and they've been dropping me off in different areas of the city, and I've been getting on the buses just to ride, whether it's the blue line, the red line going from 95th Street downtown, or whether, for that matter, taking the bus from Fullerton, the Fullerton bus to 22, all the way to downtown every day. I've been trying to get a feel for the CTA, and I'm not a new arrival to CTA ridership. When I was a little boy in Roseland, I used to get on the CTA bus on Michigan Avenue and take it to the State Street Market. If you remember, they used to have the market, and I used to go to market because my grandfather was, a Greek American immigrant, and he would, we would go to market. I would meet him at market. He would drive me home. So, I've been riding those buses for a long, long time. Hell, I was even riding the buses when they had the overhead wires. Obviously, that tells you about how old I am. But the bottom line is, I think that there are a multiplicity of things that need to be done in order to increase usage and speed up bus transportation.
And finally, how would you bring this case to Springfield, that we need more funding for transit?
Well, let me point out that obviously we have a governor that's going to be more supportive of an agenda that obviously helps people, helps working people. Having spent 12 years in Springfield, staffing just about every committee, and then later staffing the Illinois Economic and Fiscal Commission, let me just say this one thing. I recognize that when downstate legislators, when the legislators begin to push a massive road building program, we need to make sure that mass transit is a part of it. In other words, there'll be no money for roads unless there's money for mass transit. And that not only includes mass transit infrastructure, that also includes the type of increased subsidies for mass transit, so that we can begin to contemplate reducing the costs of our bus rides. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ballas.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we'd like to bring up community activist Amara Enya. Thank you so much. Here you go.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the organizers of this. Probably not the audio. But I want to thank all of you for being here to talk about this important issue. My name is Amara Enya. I'm running for mayor. I am someone who has worked in public policy. I've worked at the top levels of government. I've worked in and for the nonprofit sector as an executive, but my heart is in organizing. And so that is where I put all of my energy. You can see all of the issues in Chicago if you ride the train. If you get on the red line at 95th Street and you ride all the way up to Howard, you can see all of the challenges that Chicago faces. So if you go on the south side at 95th, you see individuals that are hustling. They have something to sell, whether it's CDs, socks, you name it, someone has it. For those of us who've had encounters with individuals who are in clear need of mental health services, you meet them on the train. If you ride the overnight, which I've done before, just because, you know that there are families who ride the trains at night, especially in winter, because they have no place to stay. They can't stay in shelters. They won't be accepted there. As you approach Cermak in downtown and heading north, you start to see some differences. The ridership looks different. So you can see how segregated Chicago is when you ride the train. As you head further north, fewer people are selling things, maybe here and there, but not as much. Affluence is different if you ride the train. I'm running for mayor because I ride the trains, and for years, as long as I've been in Chicago, I've seen the inequities and the issues that Chicagoans face as represented on those train lines. And we've come to a point in this city where we can no longer accept the status quo, where we can no longer accept things as they are. And we have an opportunity to move in a drastically different direction, with leadership that is competent, leadership that is committed, and that actually has a vision of what Chicago can be. Most of the issues in Chicago you can boil down to justice and innovation. There are justice issues with CTA ridership and public transportation. And my campaign offers a vision of how we can innovate so that we can actually do justice to all of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start with an economic question. Do you think that there should be free rides for Chicago public school students, or means testing for low-income people to have lower fares on the buses and trains?
There definitely needs to be means testing for lower income residents so that they can have access to public transportation. One of the biggest factors in ridership is whether or not you can afford the fare, and the fare has increased significantly for those of us who've ridden public transportation over the last several years. So that means testing is absolutely critical to make sure that it remains affordable. With public school students riding the train, this is an issue not just of CTA, but also of Chicago public schools. Because if you live in a certain neighborhood, say for example you live in Medical District and your child was only able to get into a school on 95th Street, that's a significant burden, not only on parents because of time and transportation, but because you're not going to send your child on the bus for an hour-and-a-half long commute. So we have to make sure that in education, our commitment is that every child, every family has access to a quality school in their neighborhood so that they don't have to travel long distances to get to school. And then that it has to be affordable. CPS students should not be taking a hit, or families taking a hit, because their parents have no other option but to send their kids to school on the bus, if that's not what they already want to do. So yes.
Thank you. Leading from that, I wondered, Mayor Emanuel was able to get a new tax on rideshare vehicles. I wondered if there are other new ways of funding public transit that you see. Another tax on rideshare, or a greater tax on gas? What do you think?
Well, first, I think the tax on rideshare, so that's even that conversation with the lack of parity between rideshare and the taxi cab industry and the effect that that has on our infrastructure is a conversation that I don't think we're having enough. Even if you look at what our current capacity is, for example, at O'Hare Airport, and how increasing ridership through rideshare services has affected that. So that's one aspect. Yes, you can increase the tax on rideshare, but we also have to look at how we reallocate what we spend within CTA. And that, to me, requires auditing how we're currently spending CTA dollars, where those dollars are coming from. Are we maximizing what we can get from federal government? If we're not, those are areas where we can build out our financial capacity. We also, in my view, have to look at other potential sources of revenue. So one that's been pushed, it's been pushed a lot, it's around the real estate transfer tax as a mechanism to support some of these other, for example, providing low-income riders with fare discounts, etc. However, I actually think that we should assess the tickets that are given to people who ride their bikes, for example. There are disparities in how these tickets are meted out. There is revenue from what the city is collecting from these red light and speed cameras and how those dollars are being used. Because if they're going back into the general fund or being put to some different use, you may be disproportionately targeting certain communities with those sorts of punitive measures, and they're not getting the benefits with increased access to public transportation. And I think that's what we're seeing across the city, quite frankly, and those are potential revenue sources within the transportation space that can help to support decreasing fares and increasing access.
Before we had talked a little bit about crime, some of the problems with people getting pickpocketed and other crimes on the CTA, people being afraid of waiting at bus shelters. What sorts of solutions do you see to make it safer to be on the CTA, especially on buses?
Well, one of the things that affects safety is density of population at bus stops and train stops. So if you're the only one standing on a platform, just by the very nature of being the only person there, you're at a higher risk. And so this gets to that bigger question of ridership. We actually have to assess the fact that many communities in the city have lost population. That actually affects ridership. Now, if you look at what's happened with the economy and the majority of jobs that were created in Chicago over the last several years, those jobs were not going to individuals who actually live within the city limits. They were going to primarily in the central business district and downtown area. So what happens when you have fewer people who have access to jobs and have less of a reason to actually stay in the city? Well, they move out. That's ridership that we're losing because we have not created an economy where individuals who live here can actually work here and use public transportation to get from point A to B. So the lower density creates a safety hazard. Obviously, you can have cameras. You can have lights. They should be well lighted, and that's been an issue on some of the train stops that are farther away from downtown. For example, I live off the Green Line. If you go west, that's an issue of lighting near viaducts, making sure that they're lighted. Those are basic safety issues that we have to attend to, but making sure that not just in the central business district, but out in those other areas, we have enough voice to push for those safety measures to be put in place.
Sandy, thank you so much. Next up, we're going to have the Illinois Comptroller, Susana Mendoza.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I'd shake your hand, but I'm a little sick. Sorry, everybody, I'm a little sick, so bear with me if I start gagging. Oh, forgot. Get started. My bad. I'm Susana Mendoza. I'm currently the state controller. I'm running for mayor of Chicago, and I'm really thrilled to be here right now with an issue that I actually care about quite a bit. I would love to talk about ways in which we can make equity, access to transportation infrastructure a thing of the reality here in the city of Chicago. I used to live many years of my life on the near southwest side of the city, just down the street, frankly, in Little Village. And for many years, I've taken the train, continue to do so today. So I'll preempt your question as to whether I ride the CTA. And I'll get to that in a minute because it's a fun story. But essentially, I remember, though, prior to being a mom and riding the CTA for those reasons, when I lived here in Little Village and I was commuting back and forth downtown every day, it was interesting, right? I mean, there's the things that you see. Amara, I think, nailed it on the head when she talked about depending on where you live in the city of Chicago, your experience with both the bus routes and the train routes are very different. It's starkly different. And I remember I used to get off on, I want to say it was Kedzie and 22nd, that stop over there. And if I timed it perfectly and the train arrived at my destination, and the bus was coming, it was safe. I could get on the bus and I'm on my way home to 26th and Sawyer. But if I didn't, the bus stop was actually so far away from the actual main entrance to the CTA stop that it created a really unsafe environment. You'd have sometimes open drug deals going on right there, and you'd be one or two people standing in an open street in an area that didn't have a lot of police patrols. So it became an issue of having to walk. It was safer for me to walk from that stop half a mile down to where I live than actually just wait for the bus stop, and that's not okay, right? The fact that I think a lot of our elected officials don't realize that is a problem. The city of Chicago absolutely needs more dedicated bus lanes. We have about 4 miles worth for our entire city, whereas cities like New York have about 80 miles and other cities have between 30 and 40 miles. My son and I, in terms of today, and my husband, we love to take the CTA. We take it all the time because our little boy, since he turned 2, is obsessed with buses and trains in Chicago. So just for fun, we walk out of our house, head over to about a block down the street, hop on the bus, take it all the way to the Jefferson Park train station, hop on the train, and then take it all the way downtown. But on the way back, we stop off at every single stop. This is what we do for fun. So I'm very interested in answering more detailed policies about what we want to do, but I think Chicago should be a city that leads the way nationally as to what we can do to make our bus system better, our train system better, to really innovate and to bring other types of transportation, like improving bike lanes, which I'm a very avid cyclist, as well as innovating with things like mobile scooters. Mobilized scooters and things like that. Time's up.
Okay, thank you. Talking about adding bus lanes, the CTA wanted to add a dedicated bus lane on Ashland Avenue nearby here and got a lot of opposition from the community. I wondered, how would you deal with opposition from business owners, with opposition from drivers to having more dedicated bus lanes?
Yeah, well, I think this is, can I sit down for this? Or okay. I think that it's all about engaging the community, right? I think that for so many years, politics, or I should say policy, has been done to the community, not with the community. And so an issue of engaging public as to why this would even make sense, right? Like, let's talk about what the problem is. And I think everybody can agree that our streets are overcrowded with cars, that the traffic, it takes forever to get from point A to point B. To then explain to people, what would you like to see? Would you like to have easy access to transportation? Would you use the system more if it was quicker to jump on, right? And walk through with the community, like, what are their biggest wants and how do we get there? There's also the reality that, the aldermen have so much say as well in what's happening in their wards versus what is best for the whole city, that we have to have an honest conversation of, one group, one constituent might really want this, but because it interferes through another alderman's route that they're opposed to it. And I think that the mayor really has to lead in bringing all of those communities who would be impacted together to figure out what the best course of action is. But it really is a leadership issue. And from that respect, community driven with mayoral leadership, and I think it's a good combination.
Thank you. I also wanted to talk about gentrification. One of the things that we've seen is a very, very heavy use of routes like the Chicago route and on the bus routes. Also on the north side of the Blue Line because of the transit-oriented development housing going in there. I wondered, how do you balance bringing in more density to the city, but also how do you deal with driving people out and how that affects transit?
So number one, we have a major, there's a whole section of our city that's disenfranchised and disconnected from the rest of the city. And we could talk about these emerging neighborhoods, and even in the downtown district, you've got all these jobs, but if people can't connect from their neighborhood to the downtown, it's as if those jobs don't exist. In some of these cooler, hipper, neighborhoods, whether it's Wicker Park or Bucktown or Ukrainian Village, it's easy to hop onto public transportation there. But it's not the case if you live way south or way west. And I think that this concept of gentrification is an issue because there's only a handful of neighborhoods that, number one, are safe and where people have access to those things that really make a neighborhood, like grocery stores and cool shopping districts and access to public transportation and the ability to walk or hop on your bike and not feel like something bad is going to happen to you. So we really have to double down on investing in areas that have been disenfranchised. The issue of, for example, motor scooters, Mary, which are not the case in Chicago, could be the difference between getting from your house to public transportation. So I don't see it as no one's going to ride their motor scooter from the west side downtown. But they will take it that 1 mile, perhaps, to get from their home to the next bus stop or the next train station. So we have to think of ways in which we can innovate, but also connect more people to the very lines of public transportation that will get them into these other neighborhoods. Because gentrification is an issue because, again, there's so many neighborhoods that don't have access to the quality things that make a neighborhood. And the ones that do, it's essentially like if you're young and cool and hip, it's not that cool and hip to be checking up with your parents, right? But that's what has to happen sometimes because people can't afford to live anywhere else, or they have to have 3 roommates to afford their rent. Let's create a Chicago where there's a whole ton of neighborhoods that have access to public transportation, that have good schools, that have things that make a neighborhood like restaurants and a shopping district. And those things are all possible. You just have to have the political will to make it happen.
And quickly, would you increase the tax on rideshare in order to get more money for transit?
So I think, again, that we have to look at, I'm not for necessarily just increasing taxes. I think that we have to look at all the other potential funding redistributions. I mean, again, I keep going back to Amara. I did say if I had to pick a running mate, it'd be her. But she's got good ideas. And this is what this whole debate about for mayor is, right? I'm actually happy that there's so many people in this race because everybody brings a different idea to the table. And we should be learning from all of us, each other, and listening. But the point being that there are revenue streams that we could perhaps do a better job, number one, of being transparent about, right? So everybody wants to know, like, the fees that we collect, where do they go? Let's start by talking about them and figuring out whether or not there's a better way to redistribute them before having to ask people to pay more out of pocket. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you so much, Comptroller.
So easy. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, and okay. Up next, Representative Ford, LaShawn Ford.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I enjoy your work. So thank you and good evening, everyone. First, I want to start out by thanking all the people here that's participating in the process, and also thank all my volunteers. You all don't have to stand. We'll keep it a secret, but I'll just tell the ones that's in the front row. Thank you so very much for coming to the forums. You don't get paid to do it. You come because you believe in the process, and I thank you. So I'm LaShawn Ford, born in Cabrini on the north side, a community that has been gentrified, where if my family put all our resources together, we couldn't move back there anyway. And then we moved to the west side Austin community, where I spent most of my time until we had a house fire and I had to move to the back of the yards for a few years while we rehabbed our family building to move back. I also taught on the north side of Chicago at Bridge Elementary School. That's near Harlem and Irving, the Hip Mall. I also went to Loyola University, so that's on the north side. So I've had my share of different communities, and as a state representative, I've had the privilege of serving for 12 years where I represented the Austin community, Oak Park, Berwyn, LaGrange Park, Forest Park, North Riverside, and parts of Western Springs. So I have a good feel for diversity in communities, and I look forward to representing a city that's very, very diverse. The city, as I see it, as we all see it, is a city that's hurting, that needs healing, and we must come together. Just recently, there was a young man named Ward that was sentenced to 84 years in prison for a murder that could have been prevented if the city of Chicago was fair and equitable, making sure that every child has a right to a quality education. Also recently on a bus stop, a young man, 19 years old, was killed by a lady that had the right to conceal carry. She shot him because he was going to rob her. That's a sign that our youth in this city needs help. And as your mayor, I will have a plan, and we have a plan right now to help our youth in the city, because the youth is they're someone that we must do everything we can to make all our lives safer and to make our futures brighter. So with that, Mary, I'm very happy to be sitting next to you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I didn't get, I need to ask right off, do you ride the bus? Do you ride the CTA?
I live right by the Blue Line, and I only take the Blue Line every now and then. It's really convenient for me because when I do hearings, it lets me out right in the Thompson Center. And I'm a Sox fan, but when I go to the Cubs game, I take the public transportation as well. So I do go to both games.
Okay, now since you're in Springfield, you know about some of the problems there. Can you explain to us why there hasn't been a transit capital bill in 10 years?
Well, that's a good question. I know the last 4 years, we know that there has been a very difficult time working with the administration. So it's my hope that now that we are about to embrace a new governor, there will be a capital bill. Dysfunction in Springfield is something that we've seen, and there's also been some concern about how we pay for it. There's always, if you're going to bring new revenue in, where would you get the money from? And so we had problems with our budget. So you can't really look at raising revenue to pay for the essentials and find other revenues to pay for public infrastructure as well. So It's been a complex issue, but it's not something that should have been ignored. The cities and the state's roads and bridges and infrastructure must be repaired, and I think we're on the right path to do that.
Do you have any new ideas for raising revenue for public transportation?
Well, it's simple. Illinois is a donor state, and when you think about the money that Illinois receives from the federal government, we receive less than $1 back from the federal government that we send. Some states receive almost $8 per dollar. And so our goal as your mayor is to make sure that we bring our federal delegation. So we have a delegation of Chicago Congress people. We have to support them. The mayor's office must be in support of our federal delegation. The mayor's office, and as your mayor, I will be in support of that delegation and the Springfield delegation so that we can bring more money back to the city of Chicago so that we can have a world-class transportation system.
One of the equity issues is that a lot of the people who live in poorer areas are dependent, and senior citizens are dependent on buses. What kind of suggestions do you have to make bus transportation better? How do we get rid of the congestion on the roads, and how do we make a bus ride more pleasant?
So when you think of the transportation system, you just think about how there's inequity in the city of Chicago. You have to have a political will to say we're going to be fair as it relates to public transportation in all communities. So right now the city does not have a focus on making sure that every community has a connection to the workforce. The city of Chicago's unemployment for the youth and the unemployment in minority communities, it's kind of high for a number of reasons. There's a skill gap, but there's also the problem of getting to employment. In communities like Austin, Inglewood, and Roseland, the businesses are not there. The businesses are in the financial district, and the businesses are in the suburbs. So what we have to do while we're building up our city to bring jobs and companies back in the city, we have to have a city that connects the workforce to the jobs in the suburbs. And that's going to be key to reduce violence in our city of Chicago, making sure people can get to the jobs where they're at. And did that answer your question?
And we also wanted to ask the question about crime. What can the police do to do a better job of making sure that the people who are making things difficult for passengers and the CTA get caught?
So we have to do everything that we can to make sure that this is not a punitive city, and that's what we have right now. The city is in charge of education, and the city is in charge of policing. The city has made the conscious decision to invest in policing and not education. And so what we're going to do is make sure that every community in the city of Chicago has quality education so that we can reduce the burden and stop the talk about how we're going to lock people up.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have our Cook County Board President, Tony Preckwinkle. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. So my name is Tony Preckwinkle. I'm president of the Cook County Board of Commissioners. You know, I believe that we have a wonderful city with great neighborhoods and a bright future. And I've spent 28 years in public life serving the good people of the city of Chicago. But let me just say, I'm going to talk first about my values and my vision for the city, and then touch on public transit. I've been a lifelong public transit user and bus rider and an active supporter of public transit. So in my 28 years of public service, I was an alderman in the city of Chicago for 19 years, and I've been president of the Board of Commissioners for the last 8. You know, the county's principal responsibilities are public health and public safety. And I believe that health care is a right and not a privilege. And we put a lot of energy into increasing access to health care and the quality of health care that we deliver in our Cook County health and hospital system. We have 330,000 people in our Medicaid expansion program, county care, most of whom have health care coverage for the first time in their life or consistently for the first time in their life. 330,000 people enrolled. You know, you shouldn't have to pay for your freedom. And we've had a situation in Cook County for a very long time where men and women awaiting trial on nonviolent crimes spent long stretches in our jail. And we've worked with the actors in the public safety arena, the chief judge, the sheriff, the state's attorney, the public defender, and the clerk, on bond court reform and bail reform. And we now have 4,000 fewer people in the jail than when I came into office, 4,000 fewer. And we've been able to focus our resources on those accused of violent crimes, as we've reduced the number of people who are accused of nonviolent crimes in our jail. I've also worked hard to be sure that the unemployed and the underemployed are well served by our public entity. And I want you to know that it's very important that we connect people in communities with high unemployment rates, and those are mostly black and brown communities, with the industries that need workers. And I've worked with a broad coalition of activists to increase the minimum wage in Cook County and provide sick pay for our workers. Now, these are all social justice issues, and social justice has been my motivation, social justice and equity in my public service. As alderman, I was one of the founders of the Progressive Caucus. I supported every single affordable housing and living wage ordinance that came before the body. You know, these are all social justice issues. As alderman and in my community, I worked to strengthen our neighborhood public schools and revitalize the communities within the ward. And everyone has the right to feel safe in their neighborhood, and I worked with community residents and police to address the public safety issues that challenge some of our neighborhoods. You know, as a mother, as a teacher, as a grandmother, you know, I believe that we need strong neighborhood schools, that we need to bring jobs to our community, and we also need to address the violence that plagues so many of our neighborhoods. So I'll answer the public transit and the transit issues, I guess, in the question period. Thank you.
Okay, I'll ask you about whether you're going to ride the CTA, but first I wanted to ask you, you're with a county board president, and you're used to working with other entities in distributing money, and I wondered how you can bring other public entities in to cooperate with the CTA in order to get people to jobs and services.
Well, one of the things we really need in our region is a universal fare card, and so that would be one of my priorities. And you know, in my service in public life, one of my strengths has been bringing people to the table and trying to get people to work together and collaborate. And we really need, it's much improved over what it was. That is the relationship between CTA and PACE and METRA. But we have a ways to go. And if we were starting from scratch, we would never set up a system which had 3 different transit entities, and we'd have one transportation network. I'm not sure how quickly we can get to that point, but that ought to be our goal over the long term, to have one transportation network and not these 3 separate, disparate entities.
What different things do you think the CTA can do to improve bus service in the city, especially to underserved areas?
Well, I think we need more bus rapid transit, and I think that we need to have I think it's important to have a transportation study for the city of Chicago. You know, one of the things I did when I came into the county was have a several-year-long process, frankly, that produced our long-range transportation plan. And while we'd previously been focused on roads and bridges, our transportation plan said you ought to look at public transit, you ought to look at pedestrian traffic, you ought to look at bicycles, you ought to look at freight. And so we ended up with a multimodal long-range transportation plan rather than one narrowly focused on county-owned roads and bridges. And I think we need to do a similar sort of long-range plan for public transit in Chicago that brings lots of actors to the table. And I know that ATA was one of the participants in our long-range planning process.
Do you see a place where get a higher tax on rideshare, or a way to control rideshare so that it's not interfering with public transit ridership?
I know that there are probably many people in this room that use rideshare. I don't. Partly because I think ride sharing is convenient, but it's disruptive in a lot of ways. First of all, it's disruptive of our taxi cab industry. We said that the only way you can have a taxi cab is to have a city medallion, and we make you pay for the medallion, and then we undermine that medallion with rideshare. So that people who invested in medallions are basically economically challenged. I won't use the word that immediately came to mind. The people in the taxi cab industry it's been disruptive of them, but the city created this monopoly, and then the city just arbitrarily said, we're going to allow, Uber and Lyft to be on the streets and to pick up people and whatever and destroy the cab industry. So I think that's been a real challenge. And it's also had a negative impact on bus ridership. So while this is convenient for a lot of people, it has had, and it's also increased congestion on our streets. So I think we should, frankly, tax ride shares more and use that money to support public transit.
Speaking of equity, do you think that there is a place to have means-tested rides or to have free rides for seniors again, and would that help ridership, or would that just be an economic problem for the CTA?
I know this is attractive to some people, but I think it's a tremendous economic problem for the CTA. And frankly, I don't think seniors should be privileged over, ordinary working people who are struggling to support their families. I think it's more important that we focus on things like universal fare cards and integrating the system rather than trying to figure out what would be a very difficult system, I think, to implement, and that is providing discounts to certain segments of the population.
And do you ride the CTA, and when's the last time you rode a bus?
Over the Christmas holiday, I was on the CTA. I should never say this in front of my detail that I take the bus sometimes, but it's true.
Okay, and then finally, are we going to get a capital bill from Springfield this year?
It's been 10 years since we had a capital bill. This is a terrible way to do long-term planning, these sort of episodic capital bills. We need a long-term plan for investment in our infrastructure in the state. And fortunately, it looks like this will be a priority for J.B. Pritzker and the Democratic-controlled House and Senate. I think that's good news for all of us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Attorney John Kozlar. Thank you for being here.
Hi everybody, my name is John Kozlar, and I first want to tell you the reasons why I'm running, introduce myself a little bit, and then we'll answer some fun questions here. But we have a tendency of Chicago of electing the same people over and over. And we were talking about the same problems year after year. This is the year 2019, and we're talking about the same issues that we had in the year 1980. And that's crime, education, and city finances. And I've heard a few candidates up here, they have this boatload of experience. But with all that experience, why is it that we have the same issues? And that just shows you that experience in politics does not equal good experience. Matter of fact, when you're in politics for so long, you become accustomed to the seat. And then what have we been seeing the last few weeks? They take care of their friends and family members, and then they leave all of us behind. And I grew up in Chicago my entire life. I've been here for 30 years on the south side. And I'm just tired and fed up that we keep electing these politicians over and over. And I don't know what it is. They just, election after election, they talk a big game, but then they get into the position, and then they change. So that's why I'm up here today. I'm here as a community member who's one of you. I'm not this person who stands on a pedestal and looks down upon the community. I've experienced that enough in my ward, in the 11th ward, against the Dailies. I ran against the Dailies 4 years ago, against Patrick Daley Thompson. I've been fighting corruption before it was a thing in the papers. And now we have another Daley running. Although he's trying to distance himself from the family. But he's just the $1 million Daley. And we need to get rid of this money in politics. If you listen to the media, there are only going to be 5 candidates that they continue to highlight. And that's wrong. They need to highlight all the candidates and treat us fairly, and they're not doing that. But the thing that we need to concentrate on is solutions. And I have a lot of solutions that are dynamic. There's another candidate, Amara, she has dynamic solutions. And then you have the recycled politicians. If we are going to make changes in Chicago, we have to change our city government. And in order to change our city government, we have to change the people who we keep electing. And first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here today. And if it wasn't, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Pilsen Alliance. That is a great group and organization that has paved the way for many changes in our city, and I hopefully I look forward to working with them as mayor. And thank you all for being here today as well. Thank you.
Excuse me, we're gonna keep on talking in the back. Can you please do the
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Kozlar, and I know something about getting my name mispronounced, so sorry about that.
That's all right, no worries.
I wanted to add, you come here to say you're ready to shake things up. I wondered, what would you shake up at the CTA in order to improve bus service in the city, to make it faster and to make it more appealing?
Yeah, the first thing about the CTA that we need to realize is that there's a lot of inequalities there. So there are people that I've been seeing when I ride the CTA, there's people with disabilities, and they're not treated fairly like everybody else. There are many stations in Chicago that don't even have elevators. And that's wrong. We forget about people who have disabilities, and that's one of the things that I would concentrate on. And we had a forum a few weeks ago. It was a disabilities forum, and a lot of people, we don't listen to them as politicians. We need to start listening to every community member. The other part is, I take the CTA going south. I live in Bridgeport, and I don't know what it is. There seems to be 3 trains going north for every one going to 95th Street. And that needs to change too. We need to treat the riders fairly in the sense of where they're going in Chicago, whether it's the south side or the west side. We need to treat everybody fairly.
One of the things that the CTA says about distributing service is that they only have so much money and they have to distribute it where the most people are. What are your ideas for improving funding for transit?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest part that we face is city finances, right? And we'll have better allocation of resources when we tackle our problems. So one of the problems that relates to riding in CTA is our pension problem. If we, in 4 years, 1/5 of our budget, literally 1/5 of our budget is going to go to the pensions, and that takes away money from the CTA. So I'm the only person talking about, I don't know, I know this is for a CTA forum and bus riding, but if we don't take care of our pension problem, and I'm the only one talking about a 401k for new employees, then we're going to continue on not having funding for the CTA. So they're all related, I'm somebody who believes that it's all about reallocation of resources. We can't continue to tax our way out of problems, because then when we tax more people, then they start leaving our city. And I want to keep the families and people who've been here for a while here.
Do you see another way of getting more people on the CTA bus service? Do you see lowering fares, or do you see expanding service to underserved areas, and how would you pay for that besides fixing pensions?
Yeah.
So the thing is, so we have monthly passes and yearly, well, I don't think there's yearly passes yet, but we have monthly passes, and I think if you live in Chicago and you're a student or you work in the city, then you should get subsidized fares. So instead of paying $100 a month for a CTA pass, maybe we're going to pay $60 a month. But that's showing, hey, we're making sure we're paying attention to our residents and people who actually work in the city. Now, if you're coming in from outside the city or if you're just visiting, I think, yeah, you should be paying a little bit more. But for our residents, we want to make it to where they're going to work or if they're going to school, we want to make that access easy. And if we can reduce the amount of money we're charging our residents, I think that will help.
One of the problems that we have with bus service is congestion, and it's also a problem, a quality of life problem throughout the city. What would you do to ease congestion? Would you have bus rapid transit lanes? Would you have higher fees on rideshare? What can we do to make this better?
Yeah, I mean, Chicago, it seems like we're living in the dinosaur age. So we only have, and I was reading the article, we have 4.1 miles of designated bus paths. Whereas if you go to one of the larger cities, they have doubled, almost tripled the amount of bus paths. So all we have to do is create more bus lanes as far as more convenience and efficiency in our transportation.
How would you deal with the backlash from businesses and from car owners who are already complaining about bike lanes and construction getting in their way?
You elect a mayor who's fierce. It's that simple. You need somebody who's going to stick up for our residents, and I think public transportation will make things more efficient and also include additional revenue for the city competing against Lyft or Uber. So if we can make sure we prioritize our citizens and our transportation from a public perspective, then we'll make solutions. But again, you need somebody who's up there that's willing to stick up for our community members. We don't usually have that in the city of Chicago. They stick up, again, for their friends and family members.
Okay. And then finally, if you wanted to put higher speed bus service on Lakeshore Drive, would you widen the drive or would you take some cars off?
Real quick.
Yeah, I mean, Lakeshore Drive, it's a beautiful thing, so I don't want to expand it to where we're going into the lake, right? So I would say maybe not expansion, maybe more or less getting cars off there. But I like driving on Lakeshore Drive.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks for having us. Thank you.
And we're going to have Robert back up here. There you go.
Thank you for staying with us. Give yourselves a round of applause. Well, we'll share with you, we sent out invitations and we tried to invite all the candidates, and you see who showed up. And we invite you to monitor our Active Transportation Now and Active Transportation Alliance websites for updates on our Walk and Roll the Vote campaign. And since we just have a smidget of extra time, we're going to have to be out of here promptly at 7:30. I'm going to let our Executive Director, Ron Burke, make a few closing comments. Ron?
All right. Thank you, Robert. Okay, let's give a big hand to Mary Wisniewski from the Chicago Tribune. If you don't read Mary's column religiously like I do, start. It's really, really good. Mary's the person who uncovered that the city of Chicago is ticketing African American cyclists at a much higher rate than everyone else. She found that out through her research. And she stayed on top of that. So, it's that kind of issue that we really care about at Active Transportation Alliance and Active Transportation Now. We've, for nearly 35 years, we've been advocating for better biking, walking, and public transportation in the city of Chicago. We're going to continue to do that. You can help by going to activetrans.org/bus. We heard what some of the candidates think tonight about our bus service, and I was encouraged. I think we had some good ideas come through. I heard some other things that weren't so encouraging. Maybe you did too. But look, ultimately, we need to hold these folks accountable. One of them is going to be mayor, maybe not the ones here tonight, but somebody running in this race will be mayor. Oops, sorry. And you can help by continuing, to track us through the Active Transportation Now website, as well as activetrans.org/bus. So we're not just about buses, but we know that the bus network in Chicago is central to really moving people efficiently, sustainably, healthy, and equitably. We know the communities of color are disproportionately dependent upon the bus service, and that it's gotten worse in recent years. We can turn that around. At our website, you can learn more about some of the key kind of low-hanging fruit to make that happen. And you can also learn about everything we're up to. So please, if you're not a member of Active Trans, become one. And if you're not tracking us already, please do. But I want to thank you all for being here tonight. And we're going to be out here in the hallway. We do have to get out of here by 7:30, but we'll be out here in the hallway. We'd love to hear from you. Maybe there's some issues that didn't come up tonight, some questions that didn't come up tonight that you would like to talk about. Let us know. Thank you all for being here.
How do I stop this?